He ticks all the boxes. He's a very well-known figure within Sudanese politics ever since the days of university. So we're very happy to have them all on board today. We'll start off each panel member of the 5 to 10 give a short intro on a specific area or topic covering Sudan, and then we'll have questions, and then we'll open up to everyone else who has a comment or cordial and polite. No name, no swearing, no name calling. We're all adults here, and we're all here to have a more in-depth and understanding and analysis of the situation to that, and how maybe we can, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dalia. So my name is Hiba Morgan, journalist with Al Jazeera English. I've been covering initially Sudan and South Sudan, but for the past few years, Sudan has been taking a decent chunk of my time because of what's been happening. First of all, the protests, the uprising, which was phenomenal, and I was very honored to cover. And seeing all the hopes in the youth and the people that were taken to the streets demanding what I and so many people would agree are their basic rights and their rights from a nation and from their leaders. And then I covered obviously the transitional government and then the 2021 coup. And then now I've been here since the start of the war. Now, I've been mostly in Khartoum during these times, but I've also visited several states before the war and after the war. And I have to say, when you're looking at the situation on the ground, and I'm currently based in Durman right now, here in the capital, Khartoum. And during the first days of the conflict, I was in our bureau, which is in Corinthia Hotel, Burj Al Fateh. So it was like right in the middle of everything. We were able to see what was happening at the presidential palace. We could see the plumes of smoke that were coming up from the airport and from the army headquarters, the panicked phone calls, the concern, the fear that relatives, friends, families had. We all had it here. To put it in one sentence, I've seen Khartoum and Sudan as a whole go down. It's like tumbling, and it's not a very slow downward spiral. It's a very quick spiral. And the thing is, we don't know where the bottom line is. And that's the concern. Every single time it gets worse and worse and worse. And you think that this is it. This is the worst level we can get to. And then you discover that, no, there is another level below the level that we're currently at. And the reason I'm saying that is because here in Omdurman, where I am, it's considered one of, I would say, the safe places right now. And even in the safe zone that I'm in, there are daily artillery shellings coming from the RSF into areas controlled by the army. There are daily artillery strikes fired by the army, into RSF territory. So we hear artillery fire every single day. We see homes being destroyed, when the artillery lands on civilian homes. We can see the impacts of that. You can see houses being crumbling. You can see people getting injured. I know hospital is not far from where we are, and the number of times you go there for one story, and then you find in the emergency room just blood on the ground because so many people have been injured as a result of the shelling. There are images that you would want to forget, and these images are some of them, but I don't think it's easy to forget because it happens every day. There's never a single day that I decided to go to the no hospital and do a story, whether it's about the renal patients or the children. You have to pass by the emergency room, and you always see that scene. The faces may differ, but then the general scene, the panic, the rush, people injured, it's always there. It doesn't change. And that's just, the start of it. There's the issue of day-to-day life here in Omdurman. And in a way, it's the entirety of the capital. we see a lot of people asking for money on the streets, and that's not because that's what they used to do. That's the norm. The norm. It's because the economic situation has forced so many people. It's cut them off their livelihoods. People don't have jobs. People don't have means to leave the capital. They don't have the means to leave Umdurman, so they're stuck here. Um, they've had to deal with the artillery shellings. They've had to deal with losing their jobs, and they've had to deal with the rising food prices. So that's created, a situation where people have to either beg for money or they have to rely on community kitchens to be able to feed themselves and their families. So that means, their families that are far from community kitchens, but then, they really need to have food. And so they go there and try to get at least a single meal a day to feed themselves. And these are all things that, we see on a daily basis. People coming into the community kitchen, whether it's for their early cup of tea in the morning, or whether it's for fatur around 10 or 11, and it's not something fancy. I don't want you to think that's, you've got a salad, some proteins and carbohydrates. No, it's usually just one single pot that has been cooked, and that's it. It could be lentils, it could be beans, but that's all there is to offer, because it relies on donors, on communities, on people like Sudanese, whether here in Sudan, inside Sudan, or in the diaspora, donating to people who open and run these communities. So when you see that, when you know the fact that this is what's happening, people are relying on community kitchens, people's situations are deteriorating. There is food coming in, but they can't afford it. We've spoken to families when we go to the market and ask them, can you afford, let's say a kilo of meat per week? And they say, no, we can't. Sometimes we can't even afford for the entire month. We don't eat meat, we don't eat chicken, we don't eat. And when you ask them, what do you eat? They say the basic things. And we buy rijla, we buy khudra, but then we can't cook it the way we cook it because of the rising prices. That's in terms of, again, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about people who are, I would say, better off than other people. And the reason I say that is because we went to Al Muhandisin when the army opened a passage between Karari and Al Muhandisin. And the first thing we did is we went to a house of a doctor called Sarah. She's basically she's opened her own community kitchen and like a community or field hospital for people. And I remember going to her house, and this kind of gives me chills because, when I was told about her, they said, oh, she helps people. And I didn't know what kind of help she provided. The first thing I noticed on the street is how everybody was super thin, and it's not like naturally thin. You can see their bones. You can tell that these are people who have been starving. And when we got to Sarah's house, while we were introducing ourselves, this middle-aged man comes in with a mug, and as he was trying to make his way to Sarah's door, he collapsed and got injured. And when we asked him what happened, is he sick? He said, no, I just got dizzy because I haven't eaten for 3 days. So, when I'm describing what's happening here in Karari, people unable to afford except for like little things like rijla and khudra, these are the people who are better off. The people who are really bad are those in areas in Al Muhandisin or at least previously bad, and as you go furthest north, or further south, actually, in Umdurman and in Khartoum, the further south you go, the worse the situation is. And that's because food doesn't come in easily. There's been sieges in areas controlled by the army, by the RSF. There's sieges in areas controlled by the RSF, by the army. And the reason why I describe those as sieges, for example, in places like Khartoum, Erkawit, Mamura, you can't bring in goods unless you're smuggling them in from places like Shindi, places like Atbara. It has to come in via smuggling. So very little comes in compared to the people who are still stuck there. Their prices are super expensive. And again, a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people don't have the means to afford it. And this is, again, we're just talking about the humanitarian situation here. What life is like. People don't have food in many places, so they rely again on community kitchens. When you talk about the military operations, I would say, just like I said earlier, daily airstrikes, daily artillery strikes. Yesterday, I was actually quite impressed. It's like, oh, look, the number of smoke that you can see rising has increased. And that's because we're used to seeing During the first few days of the conflict, it's like it was almost everywhere you turn, there's like a column of smoke rising, a column of dust rising. That was during the first few days, but then it kind of settled down, and it's like, oh, 2, 3 smokes rising from somewhere, whether it's like the southern part of Omdurman or parts of Khartoum or Bahri. Yesterday, the number was quite, I don't want to say impressive, but it was, I would say it would bring your attention to it, because there were at least 6 different columns of smoke in different parts of Khartoum as a state. So, and these are places where there are civilians. It's not like they're targeting this area and it's a military zone or a military barrack or something. No, these are places where on both sides, the places that the army is targeting, there are civilians still in there. The places where the RSF are targeting, trying to get the army, there are still civilians trapped. So there are people who, on a daily basis, don't only have to hear the sounds of the airstrikes or the artillery. No, they actually have to witness it, like the shells landing close to them. We've become so familiar to the sound of this whistle, that's when oh, I'm in danger. I need to take a protective position so that I don't get injured, or at least so that my injury is not as severe as it would be if I don't take this specific position. Countless families have to deal with that every single day. And again, this is just in Khartoum. If we take a bigger picture, if we're looking at Sudan as a whole, every time you go to a specific state, it seems to be worse and worse and worse. Take Darfur, for example. Humanitarian aid just got in there in March, and that was like a convoy from WFP crossing in from Adre. And there was a convoy coming in from Tina, actually, into Al-Fashir. UNHCR was able to come in from Adabba, but then that was before Al-Fashir became under siege. Now, over the past few days, Al-Fashir has been under siege. So no humanitarian aid can come in, at least for the time being. Markets can be resupplied, and we've seen with the siege in Al-Muhandisin, when markets can be resupplied, what that means. It means people dying from hunger. It means people not being able to get access to education. It means that in a matter of weeks and eventually months, you see people losing their weight as they're consuming the little fat and the little energy that they have on their bodies. But I have to remind you of something. MSF had already said that in Al-Fashir, in Zamzam camp in Al-Fashir, children are dying every single day, 13 babies. They put a statement out in February that 13 babies are dying every single day. And this was, of course, before Al-Fashir became under full siege. So this is what the situation is like here in Sudan as a whole. It's a deterioration that you're seeing day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour. And it looks like, I know it's been said a lot by Sudanese, because that is how it feels. It feels like you're shouting into a void. Nobody's listening. Nobody is doing enough in terms of trying to stop this downward spiral. And when you look at, again, the reason why I mentioned this earlier is covering the uprising. When you look at where we were 4 or 5 years ago, and you look at where we are now, every single thing that happens is just heartbreaking. There's nothing, well, that's not true. I wouldn't say nothing. They're seeing the emergency room responders in action, whether it's here in Omdurman or hearing about what they're doing in Bahri. One thing we have to admit is that these are the people who have, throughout everything, they've stood firm, and they've done more than what we would have expected from them. They've really given their best. I would say they've given their all, actually, to ensure that that civilians survive, that Sudan does not disintegrate, I would say, completely. They're trying to keep it together. They're trying to keep the communities together. They're trying to keep the people together. It's a bit too much for them. It's too much of a burden to put on ordinary civilians. But then again, they've proven that they're not ordinary civilians at all. So that's one bright spot in this whole entire conflict that started as a result of a power struggle. Let's face it, it is a power struggle. It's not because either side wants the best for Sudan. It's because they want to stay in power. They want to ensure that they're the ones who get a say in Sudan's wealth, in Sudan's resources, and have a say over Sudan's civilians, over 45 million, including those who were the ones behind, who were the backbone of the revolution. So both sides want to control those. And that's why there is this conflict. It's not a conflict for democracy. Let's be very honest. It's not a conflict for civilian rule. Whoever wins is not going to bring civilian rule. We know that it's not something we're going to fool ourselves with. Whoever wins is not going to ensure that, oh, there's going to be freedom, peace, and justice. We know that's not going to happen. In fact, it's going to be the complete opposite. So seeing this happening, when you remember where we were 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and the demands and the hopes, and you look at where we are now, it is heartbreaking, and what's even more heartbreaking is this could have been avoided if people had listened to the revolutionaries on the street, and nobody did. And I would say this is why we are where we are right now, because nobody listened to the Sudanese who've been calling for justice, who've been calling for freedom, who've been calling for peace, who've been calling and saying that, the declaration, the declaration that was signed between the FFC and the military in 2019 is not going to achieve those goals. Nobody listened to them then, even when the coup happened, they demanded, the military completely be removed from politics. Nobody listened to them. In fact, the international community kept engaging them over and over again, sidelining those who really cared about Sudan. And those are the people who are right now keeping the little that is left of Sudan together, and they're still not being heard. And I really hope that they are heard, because if there's anyone who can get us out of where we are, it's those people who've been always very clear about what Sudan needs, even if nobody's been listening to them.
Apologies.
Dalia, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Hiba. Thank you, Hiba, for that. Never more truer words were said. Iyad will be talking to us about his investigations, especially about the IDPs, and just his general outlook on what's been happening and his reporting on the war in Sudan and its devastating effects. Iyad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dalia. Thanks for Fikra Institute for inviting me to participate in this important discussion. Okay, so as the result of the outbreak of the ongoing conflict in Sudan since April 15 last year, Sudan is going through the worst humanitarian and displacement crisis in the world. More than 90% of the Sudanese can't afford more than one meal per day. More than 19 million Sudanese are in need for urgent humanitarian aid. More than 8.5 are internally displaced. More than 2 million had to flee to neighboring countries. 200,000 kids might die in the next few months due to malnutrition, and in fact, every 2 hours, a kid dies in Zamzam camp in Darfur. Both of the warring parties are accused of serious crimes and crimes against humanity. Both of the warring parties are weaponizing starvation. And on the situation in refugee camps, we're talking about more than 400,000 individuals who were forced to seek refugees in camps situated either on the border with Chad or within Chad itself. Many of these camps along the border have long-standing history, have been established during al-Bashir regime, aimed at the conflict that persisted from 2003 to 2019, before the current conflict began. Approximately 3 million individuals were residing in these camps. However, since the conflict started, the numbers have been increasingly daily. The numbers of children facing or suffering from malnutrition has increased from 17 to 19 child per day, which count only those who reach health centers. Daily death toll among children has risen to 11 to 20 cases daily. Also, there is a huge increase in number of miscarriages cases since the outbreak of the conflict. Is due to malnutrition and the lack of primary health care for pregnant women. A report by the Humanitarian Research Lab of Yale School of Public Health suggested that the RSF forces are now likely able to move freely to Al-Fashir and Zamzam camp. I believe the situation could indeed worsen significantly, potentially leading to a huge internal displaced crisis in the city of Al-Fashir. Refugees are Refugees in Zamzam camps are already facing dire conditions with reports of children dying every 2 hours. If the RSF were to siege the camp, the situation would escalate to unimaginable level of suffering and desperation. I want to highlight the narrative of women visiting in internally displaced refugee camps in Darfur. I view this as a valuable opportunity for the world to listen to their struggle. Displaced person Yusra described the suffering of women in Kelma camp with the severe shortage of food. She said to me, we as women in Kelma camp are suffering greatly. There are people there who don't have any food at all. Yusra revealed the security threat refugees in the camps might face if they thought about leaving the camps to provide for themselves or their families. Men cannot go out to search for work as soon as they leave the camps. They are being at risk of being killed. And as women, if they go out, they might be raped or beaten. And she prayed that this war stops and organization could help them. Another displaced person called Fatima. She is a mother of 10 children. She lives in near Titi camp. She has a child suffering from severe malnutrition and is in a state between death and life. And there's a lot of other families suffering from the same condition. She said she have nothing to eat and her child is between life and death. There's no food and our situation is dire. I hope humanitarian organizations can help us. And unfortunately, it's a tragic situation they're living on daily basis. And on the situation of Sudanese journalists, sadly, many Sudanese journalists lost their jobs due to the conflict. Some are now displaced within the country, trying hard to support for their families. Others managed to flee to neighboring countries, but they face challenges as refugees. Journalists who are internally displaced still reporting on Sudan situation are facing serious danger. They're being targeted by the warring faction in areas they control, putting their life at risk every day. So we can reflect what's going on in Sudan. We have seen this with the abduction of our colleague Haytham Zaballah, who was held captive by the RSF in the capital for months before being released recently. While we relieved that Haytham was released and now he's safe, the threat persists. On the other hand, the SAF has declared state of emergency in the areas they control, targeting journalists and anti-war activists. Both of the two warring parties, the SAF and RSF, disregard press freedom and civilian safety. But still, our brave colleagues continue to document the crisis Sudan is going through, despite these risks. And definitely, we can tell that there is issues or lack of international media coverage on the situation in Sudan, as Hiba was saying. In my view, I believe that the absence of international media coverage of the conflict in Sudan is fundamentally tied to political agendas among regional and global players, as well as political calculations among actors within the regional and international community regarding the ongoing conflict in Sudan. So I believe without a political will by the international community to address the crisis Sudan is going through, I don't believe we will see this ongoing conflict under the spotlight internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Iyad. It's very upsetting to hear these numbers. I mean, we keep repeating them, but it just doesn't make sense sometimes. Where you left off is actually where Dr. Amjad comes in perfectly regarding the political outlook. I'd like Dr. Amjad to talk about the Sudanese political outlook. What's the shape of it? Is there any hope there? And also the international community, their role. Do they have a role? Dr. Amjad was recently invited to attend the Paris conference. So he was there, he was part of it, and like I said, he has a lot of experience in this field. So Dr. Amjad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dalia, and thank you, Hiba and Iyad, for participating with us in this conversation. I think it's very important to get as much of the Sudanese views on the current crisis, because the political crisis have made everyone in Sudan a stakeholder. What's happening in Sudan right now is the biggest existential crisis that attacked us in their houses, in our normal livelihood. Politics is not a job of politicians anymore. It's the burden of everyone in Sudan. The whole Sudanese communities are now either displaced or besieged or suffering in a way or another of the burden of this war. I think it's very important to start by defining the right analysis and the right description of this war. This is a war between two bad actors. There is no noble fighter among this war other than the Sudanese who are suffering to defend themselves and their livelihood and their attempt to live another day. It's a war between a corrupt political apparatus of the state that have been corrupted by over 30 years of the monopoly of the Muslim Brotherhood. It got engaged in economy, in ruling, in doing jobs other than their own role. And this made them incapable of doing their original work, as we witnessed in the last year. And on the other hand, we have a private fascist militia that's owned by one person and his family, who tried to preserve the institutional independence of his militia with its political and economic and foreign and regional extension, in order to serve his private interests and the interests of the states that supporting him and stand behind him, and mainly the United Arab Emirates. And on that, I think the only good thing for this war that can happen for this war is to stop, and to stop as soon as possible. But it shouldn't be stopped by the winning or the victory of one of the two warring parties. The war needs to stop in the right grounds that allow putting the foundation to reform the Sudanese armed forces, a structural and deep reform that's needed to regain its institutional role, and for it to be able to do its duty as part of the state apparatus, not as a structure that's super to the state. And in the same time, we need to end the institutional existence of the RSF and for any other militia in Sudan for that sake. The continuation of the current institutional the continuation of the current warring parties in their current institutional structure is the worst that can happen to Sudan. And as well, mixing two bad apples does not make good apple juice. The summarization of the security sector reform just to the integration of the two warring parties will be the recipe of more destruction in Sudan, more civil war, and more coup d'etats. The war that's happening in Sudan, it's not happening only on the fighting ground. There is also a war between the different narratives of the two warring parties. There is a narrative that tried to frame this war as continuation of the revolution of the peripheries and the margins of Sudan against the central state. And that's not true, because Al-Masalid are part of the peripheries of Sudan. Al-Zaghawa and Al-Fur are parts of the peripheries of Sudan, of the peripheries of Sudan. Those who are living in the rural villages of Al Jazeera and of Sinnar, who have been daily attacked by the RSF, are part of the brief list of Sudan. And the revolution itself is a positive act of reform. It's not an act of criminality. It's not an act that can be seen through destruction and looting and raiding of women and killing on ethnic ground, such as RSF are doing on daily basis. We cannot accept this narrative because the result of this narrative is to end the war, is to end the war by another deal of sharing power between the two warring parties. And this is no good for the future of Sudan. Another narrative that need to be resisted in the war that's currently happening in Sudan, that it's war against the political Islam. And this narrative is being pushed mainly by foreign and regional forces and mainly the UAE. Emirates is trying to portray itself or to frame itself as fighting for democracy in Sudan. I think the main thing that we can tell them to do is to fight for democracy in their own countries before thinking about ours. And in the same time, it is the same Emirates that allowing the funding and support of a Shabab Somali group that's linked to Al-Qaeda. This is a bloody share that cannot cover the destruction of our country. The problem of the international community that UAE is very important for them. It's very important for their international trade. It's very important. It has its diplomatic relevance for them, and for that they are outsourcing the Sudanese crisis to them. The problem that UAE is not either and does not care about stopping the war in Sudan, but rather it cares about serving its interests even over the blood and the skulls and the bones and the corpse of the Sudanese. This should not be accepted. The international community initiative towards Sudan are a mess. There is multiplicity of platforms. We had Jeddah, we had Al Manama, we had the EAU attempts, we had the EU current ongoing endeavors, and we had the neighboring countries' initiative. All these initiatives should be welcome, but they should be coordinated and they should put the interest of the Sudanese people and the aspiration of the great revolution that we had in 2018 and 2019 as a referendum of what the Sudanese want. It should not be manipulated to serve foreign agenda. I want to also to point to a very important thing, which is great and valor endeavors of the emergency response rooms. As Hiba said, they are the only thing that preserves the Sudanese state, that preserves some of the dignity of the Sudanese in the time of their need. They continue to work with very limited resources and literally no experience in facing such circumstances other than their commitment to their people and to um, and to maintaining their dignities. However, the international community or certain actors in the international community are trying to institutionalize them and force them into frameworks that the international community can deal with. This should not be accepted. The emergency room should be supported and should be funded and should be welcome. But this support and funding should go to the emergency response room in their terms, not in the international community terms. They don't have the luxury of filling 20 pages proposals or doing extensive clearance reports. They basically lack the capacity and the facilities to do that. The international community should learn from them and from their successful experiences how to tackle humanitarian crises in such circumstances. One last thing about the false narrative that's being propagated by by the militia and its supporters. They are dehumanizing the crisis in Sudan. When we mention the numbers, 19 million people are dying, or 18 million people facing hunger, 4 million people, 4 million girls and women are at risk of sexual violence. They increasingly become meaning nothing to the foreign audience because they see our political elites and the political class dealing with the militia and trying to give them the nobility of representing the oppressed populations of Sudan. The militia do not represent anyone other than themselves. They do not represent the Arabs. They do not represent the margins. They represent their criminality and nothing else. The problem of dehumanizing the crisis, increasingly decreasing the attention and decreasing the interest in sorting out the Sudanese problem. And this hegemonic approach, this hegemony is one of the defining characteristic of the fascistic nature, of the fascist nature of the militia. There is no state model that can be that existed in the areas that the RSF controls. And this does not mean automatically defending the army or defending the SAF, but at least SAF is part of the state apparatus and is a state of law with its deficiency, but it's the only states that we have. Let's not forget that we are a great nation. We had a great history and we had a rich political experience. We cannot let this just go for the aspiration of Hemedti and his supporters, foreign allies, to rule Sudan and take its roles. Thank you, Dali, very much.
Thank you, Amjad. Thank you all. You've really given given me personally a lot of food for thought. Just for those who joined us late, we'll be opening the floor for questions, but we remind everyone, please keep it civil and cordial. No personal attacks, no swearing, no rudeness. We actually all want to gain from this discussion, and we want to see what steps we can take to move forward as a country, as a people. So my question is just to get the ball rolling, so to speak. There's a lot of talk that the political structure in Sudan, the political parties and civilian parties, they're compromised. They're severely compromised. So what options do we have as Sudanese if the army, with its history of bloodshed, let's not fool ourselves, since this country gained independence, the army has not been our friend. And like Amjad said, they are they're a state apparatus that, it is there. It's part of the outlook, the picture of Sudan. We cannot dissolve it, we cannot remove it, but it does need reform. The RSF has no say. It should have no say. And that was what we were calling for in 2019. That's what we were calling for in 2021 after the coup. But at the same time, our political actors are severely compromised. And there's already been splits, not just in the political level, but also on the social level. If you come out and criticize the army, you get called an RSF supporter. If you criticize the RSF, you're called Kazan, Islamist, Fulul. So the splits, the schisms within society are already beginning to show up. And the schisms and the splits within the political arena is there for everyone to see. So what step can we take to ensure that we can move forward, that we can find a way for this war to end? Because bottom line, the war has to end. And then from there on, we move forward. But how do we get that war to end? Who will represent the people and represent the people in their best interest and in the best way possible, without, being called out for being sellouts or being, agents and so on and so forth. Unmute yourself, Hiba.
Right. Amjad, do you want to go first?
No, I'm part of the host, so you go first. We give the guest the first one.
you. Right. I would say I would agree with you on this whole political parties being compromised, Dalia. But I think we should have noticed that they were compromised from the get-go, from 2019 when they started negotiating with the army and the RSF. Because when the protesters were out there and they were making their demands, it was very clear that, we want a civilian government. There was never, we want a power-sharing government, it was very clear, those demands were clear. So we knew that, that's when we should have started asking ourselves questions. The fact that we woke up to this realization a bit late is, I don't want to say it's on us because, or on the Sudanese people, because they really wanted change, that they were willing to put up with the fact that it's going to be slow, that there's going to be obstacles. They didn't understand how much, and I would be very honest, like I said, I covered the revolution, before the revolution, during the revolution, the coup. Even I took some time to notice that, that there's something that's severely wrong with the political parties here. Initially, I thought it would be, something that could be adjusted, reformed really quickly, but, this conflict opened my eyes to how compromised they are. Now, what options do we have and how do we get this war to end? I think we can't rely on the political parties, if they could have any impact on the warring sides, on the things and the situation on the ground, I think would have seen it by now. But then what we've seen, the glaring observation, is that they have been absent from the get-go. They've not stood by the ERRs, they've not stood by the communications, they've done nothing, to be honest, except obviously call for an end to the war. But then in terms of practical actions, we've not seen anything from them. And I think we've got to look at what people have been doing in terms of practical action. We are not going to stop the war by raising, placards saying, end the war. That's not going to happen. If we think that's how it's going to happen, we're being very naive. I think we're going to have to listen to the ERRs, and they're the ones who are going to be able to give you a good response. For us to stop the war, first of all, we have to get the people, the warring side specifically, to understand the necessity of a ceasefire and understand the benefits of having a ceasefire in terms of humanitarian operations. There's this, like in Arabic, we say, I think this is the point where we're going to have to understand that, or try to compromise in the sense of, you guys would get, for the besieged areas, you'd be able to get in food supplies and fuel. In return, we civilians, we also need a ceasefire to be able to allow for 1, 2, 3. The fact remains is that for any talks to end the war, it has to start with a ceasefire. And for you to have a ceasefire, there has to be something that both sides see to their benefit. Because let's face it, saying that civilians are dying, civilians are starving, sick people can't get medication is not going to move them, because they don't care. 45 million civilians, for them, do not factor. They don't care about us. If we think that they do, then we're fooling ourselves here. So we're going to have to look at what they stand to gain, even if a little bit, from a ceasefire, and see what the demands of the ERRs are and what they need as well. And that's going to be the terms and conditions of a ceasefire, humanitarian access. Do you need aid in? Do you need food? Do you need medication? You need humanitarian corridors open for people to be able to leave. And then from there onwards, ceasefires always have duration. It's like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 day. We need to know how long that ceasefire is, so that you don't want to be, walking or leaving your home thinking, you're going to make it to a safe route, and that ceasefire just ends and they start firing at each other and you're caught in the crossfire. So I think having something, that would benefit both sides without making the situation even worse for us as civilians, for people who are trapped. At the same time, having benefits for civilians, providing them with humanitarian access, with corridors to leave. That will be the start. And then from there onwards, we can take it to another level now. Since you two could agree on a ceasefire, why not have something even bigger? It has to start small, saying both of you stop because people are dying is not going to do it, because, and it is sad to say, they don't care about us. And I think, the sooner, we already know that, I don't want to say the sooner we realize, we know that. It's something we've been saying over and over again, but the sooner we get the international community to realize that, that the 45 million don't factor in is the earlier we can actually try to look for alternatives. Because when you look at the Jeddah Declaration, you know, it was always, oh, you know, we want humanitarian access, we want humanitarian corridors. But for both sides, there was no benefit. And that's why up to date, you know, you can't see any concrete result of that Jeddah Declaration that was signed, because both sides did not see anything beneficial for them. And at the same time, they didn't see anything that harms them. And this is where the second point comes in. Not only give them something that's beneficial, but give them something that, you know, consequences of, if you do not do this, there will be consequences. Both sides have never had to face consequence for anything they've done throughout their entire history. The SAF since its creation, RSF since its creation from 2003 going on until it became an official force in 2013, and when its law was enacted in 2017, when it was amended. Up to date, they never had to face any consequence for what they have done to people on the ground. And for them, that they had not faced any repercussions is part, I would say a large part of why we're here, because they've always said, and I think, and I've talked about this before to friends, the fact that's why when both of them commit crimes, they film it, you know, because for them, it's something they can get away with. It's always been, you can do what you want. We're not going to do anything. In fact, we're going to reward you. Here's a higher position. Here's more weapons. Here's more money. Here's more access to Sudan's resources. That has proven, you know, without repercussions, without consequences, without sanctions, without accountability, is why we're here. So if we're going to make sure that, you know, we end this war, we have to give them clear consequences of what happens if we do not have a ceasefire, what happens if we do not stop, what we can do, whether it's as a regional body, you know, if you're looking at IGAD or any other body, or the AU for that matter, whether you're looking at the international community, whether you're looking at the Troika, whether you're looking at the UN, the fact that there is no consequence is why any talks of ceasefire, any hopes of ending this war is not taking hold. Because if we stand to benefit nothing and we can get away with it, why should we even negotiate? Why should we try to look out for the people? Why should we even sit down with each other? And I think that's those two issues is why we haven't had a genuine, you know, forum where this war is ending.
Yeah, Amjad, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Hiba. I think you framed it in a way that made me even think about it in more clear manner. And the reference to the Jeddah Declaration, I want to add one thing. One big problem of Jeddah Declaration, it allowed the warring parties to renegotiate what they were supposed to already be committing to. You don't negotiate the Geneva Convention one more time. You don't negotiate the law of war one more time. Even war has rules. But regarding, and this allowed them to use issues like humanitarian access, protection of civilians, safe corridors, which was supposed to be pre-made commitment of from their sides, but they made it political task to negotiate around. Even right now, the return of the personal private belongings of the people is an item for negotiation. This is not acceptable. War is a political issue, and the negotiation about the war should be kept to these political issues. It shouldn't address negotiation to end the war should not be around humanitarian commitments, should not be about private ownership, should not be about even things like the sanity of the schools or the mosque or the church or the health centers is becoming now an issue of negotiation. But regarding the political parties, I don't like to say that they are completely corrupt and co-opted. It's not. There is nothing that's set on the stone. they have a bad political line and they are going in a wrong political trajectory right now. But we should continue pressing on them. And this is why we're having Hiba and Iyad, who are significant journalist voice. We keep pressing on them to correct their wrong trajectory, to tell them what does the people think about the lines that they are taking and the roads that they are taking, because this is the political parties that we have. We shouldn't just get rid of them because we don't have an alternative. Of course, we can always have new political parties, but it's better also to put public pressure on these political actors to regain them to the line of the people. And on that, Hiba mentioned something that made me think about the increasing politicization of the efforts to stop the war. No to war slogan, instead of becoming a people slogan and public demand, is becoming a political slogan of political actors that are taking positions in this war. Even RSF supporters, while they continue looting and plundering and raiding, they talk about no to war slogan. And this should not be accepted. It should be exposed. It should be exposed and restored and redefine the no to war slogan as a stand, as a noble stand for peace and a stand against the two warring parties, and not to allow one of the two warring parties to use it as a tool of hegemony. One last thing, and I'm happy to see some friends from the US government there, is the institutional impunity that also Hiba talked about. That like those two actors always had impunity. Instead of pointing fingers to the institutional responsibility of the crimes that committed, the international community in the beginning continue to vaguely point to perpetrators of crimes, armed men committing this and that and that. 90% of the sexual violence have been committed by the RSF. But when the reports get to the previous American ambassador, he pointed to military factions around the country. And this is actually told the RSF that they can get away with it, there is no institutional responsibility over what their militiamen are committing. This has allowed them to continue using this impunity as a recruitment tool. It allows them to call for more soldiers and militiamen to join them because they can loot or raid or steal or even kill, and they can get away for it. And while their leaders are negotiating the international humanitarian law in Jeddah, pointing to it's war between two bad actors, but the violation should be pointed to as those who are committing it.
Iyad, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I believe, in my view, that neglecting the necessity of involving youth organizations like the emergency committees actively working and operating in the capital and other cities, along with resistant committees, does not effectively address the Sudanese crisis in the way that align with the interest of all influential segments of the society. I believe that a comprehensive political solution in Sudan cannot be achieved without engaging grassroots youth organizations. Both SAF and RSF have been engaged in lawful action, such unlawful actions such as a tragic event during the breaking the sit-in in 2019. It's critical to listen to the concerns of the Sudanese people and make sure those responsible for the crimes are held accountable. We also need to bring different groups together and make sure everyone understand each other. And this means talking openly, including everyone in decisions, making sure human rights and law are respected. Thank you.
Thank you, Iyad. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panel members? If you do, just do the raise your hand icon so I can.
I see a question from Rawana Sadiq
Okay.
about
Yes.
the journalistic practices and narratives.
Okay. She's asking both you and Iyad on the generalistic practices or narratives that you feel are misinformed or mischaracterize the situation in Sudan, and how can they be combated? This is about the misinformation, I'm guessing, the use of misinformation on social media, especially. So if you guys could answer that.
Yeah,
Iyad, I'll let you go
first.
first.
No, Hiba, go first. Ladies first.
All right. So thank you. There are several practices I would say that would mischaracterize the situation in Sudan generally, and I think it's not because journalists intentionally do it. It's because of where they are geographically and the inability to try to go to the other side. Now, one thing I feel guilty about is it's very hard to get perspective from the other side. Areas controlled by the RSF, you have to rely on telephones and messages from people in those areas. And the reason why you have to do that is because you're concerned about their safety, first of all. A lot of people don't want to show their faces, which is understandable. They don't want their voices to be heard. They want to be, they're quite satisfied for safety reasons of having only, like what they have relayed to us as journalists told, via messages, and then, we pass it on to the world. And it's vice versa as well. People who are in RSF, in RSF controlled territories, and they're reporting, if they want to balance it, then they have to get from people in staff areas, but then it also has to be, because usually it's negative, nobody comes says that, oh, it's, again, like I said earlier, it's not greener on the other side here. Or I would say it's mildly greener on the army side because of the access to food and access to many things. And again, you don't have to worry about, I wouldn't say, crimes committed against civilians. There is always that concern. It's just that it's at a very low level. That doesn't mean it's not there, but then the bar is so low that the fact that it's not happening at such a high level makes you feel safe. The truth is, it's not. I don't have to worry about a drunk soldier out on the street when I'm going out. I don't have to worry about, a checkpoint that could potentially steal my stuff, because that did happen in a self-controlled territory. I don't have to worry about things. So the journalistic practices that harm the stories or this information coming out or mischaracterize the situation in Sudan is the fact that, like, you're unable to balance. But this is not, again, it's not because we do it intentionally. It's because of where you're situated, the situation around you, the restrictions and the concerns for safety. Once you find that, people are open to talk and people are open to a lot of things, and that's when you realize that it paints a bigger picture, but because it's a bigger picture, it's a more clearer picture than the small picture that we paint. And I have this belief that whenever we put out a report or a story, it's always just a tiny piece of a very big puzzle. And the pieces are so small and so many that, you have to be an avid follower of what's happening in Sudan to be able to get that. That's one of the practices. The other practice, I think, is reliant a lot on hearsay. And there's always this pages and accounts on social media that start off as a very credible account, and people start relying on it for information. And then when they have a misinformation, you just take it as it is because you're so used to it's being credible. But you start with one news and you verify it because it's like, oh, it's a news source, but let me verify, and you verify. And then eventually, after 10 or 15 news information that you verified, you decide that this is becoming a trustworthy source, whether it's a news outlet or whether it's an account of a person you follow. And then that person, after becoming credible and gaining more followers, starts to pass on that misinformation that they want to pass on, or they become lazy as well. And it's not because it's an intentional thing. It's because the information flowing in, sometimes it's too much that, you have to look all over the place and then you get confused. But then also sometimes because of especially now, where the time we're in with internet blackouts in many parts of the country, when you get the news from sources that you deem credible, you immediately go with it because you have very little way of verifying it. You can't verify what's happening in Al-Wafa in Al Jazeera right now because of the internet blackout. So when you see a credible account posting something or sharing a news information, you start believing in it and you carry it on, you pass it on forward. But the thing is, sometimes you forget that that is a single account that has gained your attention because they've posted several news or information that is proven to be true. It doesn't mean that it always is. This verification has to be there all the time if you've not spoken to the source directly. But then we forget that, if I take it from one person and then I pass it on, I'm not passing it on to another single person. I'm passing it on to millions of people. And sometimes we forget that. What you're taking from one person and you're passing on goes on to the entire world. And again, like I said, it's the issue of internet blackouts, the issue of, accounts and people, gaining your trust by giving you credible information and then eventually passing on the information that they want. And you don't realize that because they've gained your trust and you've verified them so many times that you feel that, so what, I've verified them 15 times. I don't need to do the 16th. No, you actually do. We need to do that. We need to verify every single time if we're not talking to the sources directly. And that's why I think if we're not talking to the source, as journalists who are still in the country or covering the country, we need to take everything that we're being told with a grain of salt. Again, because it's not easy. And if we're doing it, we might as well be doing it well.
Iyad?
Yes, as Hiba was saying, getting information or confirmed reports from Sudan is very difficult due to the situation on the ground, telecommunication blackout, and accounts on social media of the supporters of the two warring parties publishing misinformation and supporting their ideas or their point of view. And always when you report on something, you ask for confirmation from the both warring parties, they ignore you. And if you wrote that the staff did that, they won't be happy with you. If you said the RSF is doing that, they won't be happy as well. But the main thing that our colleagues like Hiba and the brave journalists and they're still in Sudan, they're trying as much as they can to reflect the situation with accurate information, bringing reports, discuss the situation on the ground, the risk they are taking every day. So I believe we could bring more accurate information if both of the warring parties decided to respect press freedom or try to help the journalists to do their work. But both of the warring parties are standing on the propaganda. So that's why I believe colleagues like Hiba are doing a great job reporting for us the current situation on the ground.
Thank you, Iyad. You're amazing and exceptional.
Thank you.
You are both amazing. I enjoy reading. I shouldn't say I enjoy, but watching your reports and reading your reports. I automatically, whenever I open them, I'm like, I know it's not misinformation, it's verified information. It's from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And it gives me clarity on what's happening, being so far away. And like you said, relying on social media doesn't help because there's too much misinformation there. Dr. Amjad, do you have something to add to this question about misinformation?
I want to talk about the use of disinformation as political tool, which we have been seeing for some time right now. And I know that I kept describing the RSF as fascist without actually substantiating this claim. But it's not political shaming or it's not political naming. The RSF is actually takes the 14 defining characteristic of what's fascist is, what's fascism is. And part of this is hegemony. And the hegemony, by hegemony, they always try to fill the media with news as misinformation that glorifies them, and it glorifies humanity. And this hero worship is and also try to stigmatize those who are attacking or criticizing them. And by default, also attacking the other party, which could be fair if it's based on reality. There is enough news to frame both warring parties as criminals. But when you start creating fake news, and when you start creating lies and propaganda that actually fuels the war more and more, and it also increases the tribal and social polarization, this has long-term impact. And they are using it both for recruitment and by trying to have whole social groups and whole tribes in their sides. This is a political fight. This is a political war over political objectives. You cannot take social wounds, as described by some of the FFC leaders, to put them on the side of this war or that war. We have a very rich history, political history in Sudan. We are a great nation, and this is not me being nostalgic about Sudan. Sudan had a history of political organization. We cannot accept this retrogression to civil war. I think this discourse is dangerous, and the use of fake news and propaganda to fuel it will have very long term impact. And this put even more responsibility and burden on the journalists, not only to get the news as it is, but also to fight the fake news and to fight the misinformation narratives.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Amjad. There's one thing that's always been, I've been thinking about when you compare, for example, what happened in Ukraine. Why do you think the international community hasn't reacted as forcefully in direction to both the SAF and RSF like they have, for example, with the Wagner Group and Russia? Albeit Russia invaded another country. However, we are facing a war, a proxy war, so to speak, where outside actors are having a huge say in how this war pans out. And yet the international community's reaction towards these outside actors has been beyond dragging of the feet. It's become something similar to see no evil, hear no evil. They're turning the other cheek. They're pretending like it does not exist. Yet you've had reports, media reports, you've had UN reports highlighting and pinpointing countries that are having a massive say on how this war is being played out in Sudan. But nothing is being done. No punishment, so to speak, has been meted out to the likes of the UAE, to the likes of Chad, and all the other actors who have a dirty hand in this war. I've always wondered why.
I believe it's because the international community is putting their political calculations at first. Actually, they're turning their heads away from the situation in Sudan, not only in Sudan, in Congo, in Lamhara region. A lot of areas people are suffering. For Gaza, for example, they are doing that for political calculations, and they're turning their heads away, not to get maybe in a political struggle with their allies who are involved directly and indirectly in the situation in Sudan. So without really the international and regional community having the political will to address the situation in Sudan, I don't think we will find this conflict is under the spotlight internationally, because putting the ongoing conflict in Sudan under the spotlight will expose those regional and international actors who are involved and fueling the ongoing war in Sudan.
But that means that without the international community, this war can carry on for years on end. So on
No,
the one hand, the international community is
people,
helping, but on the other hand, they're not helping. But we need their help. We need their role. We rely on them because we believe they have more influence on the two sides, but they're not using that influence. But we keep asking for them to do something, and nothing is being done. And then we come and say, well, you're not helping us. So it's a very,
I believe the decision of the beginning of the war and ending the war is not in the two generals' hands. They are not in control of that decision. So what we can do is to expose and reflect the situation in Sudan and the involvement of those regional and international actors fueling this ongoing conflict. If we did that, we're going to put the international community under pressure to get involved seriously and to address the ongoing conflict and the political issues they are facing by neglecting the situation in Sudan and in other areas as well.
Okay. We have a question from Ahmed Isawi. It's for you, Hiba. He says, you talked about consequences and the lack thereof. It is very rare for Sudanese political leadership to be subjected themselves to any level of direct media scrutiny and questioning, even for parties and civilian coalitions that some might otherwise consider them more democratic. Example, Taqaddum. We've made it possible for this culture of spokespersons or advisors to become quite prevalent, which enables them to easily walk back statements. Example, the recent incident with Taqaddum spokesperson No Good. What can we do to combat that?
I think it's not something that we can do as a community. I think it's where we journalists have to sit down with each other and agree that, I would agree with you, Ahmed, this whole spokesperson, advisor, counselor, we gave them way too much weight, I would say. We give them too much significance than what they actually are. It's not every day that, you hear advisors speaking on the media. It's usually a spokesperson, a media official. That's where it comes from. I think it's down to the media environment. It's not a free media environment. People have to worry about many things, including self-censorship. That's one thing. But we're also used to the fact that those journalists or journalists generally, it's very rare that you would find a journalist who's out there to do their job. They want to do the job, yes, but a lot of them are politically or have some kind of alliance to a certain side. You would find a journalist that is allied to the FFC, so they would go easy and soft with the questions. You have journalists that are pro-RSF, so when it comes to the RSF issues, they ask the softer questions, like, oh, what are you doing with regards to humanitarian assistance? What are you doing in terms of, ensuring civilians live in peace? But then, when they talk about the army, it's like, oh, the army aircraft bombed and killed. Yes, that's happened. But then there are also things that the RSF are doing that you need to highlight. So having the fact that they're journalists that are pro one side or the other has resulted in us giving this person, whether it's a spokesperson or an advisor, that significance that I think most of them do not deserve. That's one thing. But then the other thing is, in terms of allowing them to walk back, I think we should have gone really hard on that No Good statement. That is one thing that was very glaring and out there, because he himself, when he wrote his statement a few years back, that's not what he used to say. So I think the fact that, we as journalists, we're satisfied with, oh, we got a good soundbite, and then you walk away. Sometimes it's good to push what that person tells you. It doesn't make sense, when they say, oh, let's say the army is full of Islamists, and you're like, well, yeah, but they did create the RSF, didn't it? So the RSF technically is born out of the Islamists. There are things that you can argue back and forth. It's not like you just take that statement and run away with it, just put it out on air or print it and publish it. The sad truth is this is what's happening in the media environment here. But then I understand why it's happening. We as journalists understand why. It's the result of lack of media freedom. It's the result of wanting to see a specific side. pay for something they've done to Sudan's history. You know, for some people, it's we want the RSF to pay for what they've done to Khartoum at the moment and other places. For others, it's we want the army to pay for what they've done to political parties throughout their history. So it's like a cycle of revenge that journalists are taking out on each other, or taking out against the other side via their outlets. That's the sad truth. Now, what we can do to combat that, like I said, journalists need to put more scrutiny to the statements that are given by, you know, spokesperson and advisors. And we also have to allow ourselves to be held accountable by the people. So I think we need to open ourselves to our own reflection and scrutiny. But I think we also need, when people call us out for our shortcomings, and that has happened at some point in this conflict, it was quite hard to see, but it was also refreshing to know that, you know, people are keeping an eye on us, not because they want to criticize us, but because they're relying on us for information. So when you see that, you know, people are saying it's not being reported enough. I got a message, I think, some time back saying that the Nuba Mountains is not being reported enough. These kind of scrutiny, these kind of questions and accountability remind you that we're not accountable to those spokespersons who are giving statements. They're accountable to us as journalists, and we in turn are accountable to the people out there. So the cycle of accountability, having, you know, people criticize us when they feel like we're not doing enough, when they feel like we're not being hard enough, is what we need, especially in these times, because it's a reminder that we are the ones who are passing information. And again, I think we need to, as journalists, ensure that we don't just make everybody a star. We have that. And like I said, it comes down to the affiliations that many people, many journalists in the field have. So we tend to promote a specific figure, promote a certain character, because, you know, we want to see them and what they say shine. You know, we want, oh, this person from Hizb al-Ummah should be reflected as, you know, this person is you know, what they're saying is right and what they're saying should be heard. So we start making stars out of them, you know, out of Sudanese Congress Party, out of all of those people that we're so familiar with. And then there's the other issue, now that I'm thinking about it, is trying to go with the flow. You know, you see this pattern of, oh, everybody, and we saw that in 2019 when it's like, oh, everybody's following Al-Assam, you know, he's like everybody's crush. So people want to rush him to get an interview with him. They want to rush him to get a statement from him, you know, and then you realize like, oh no, actually, you're standing in front of him with the camera and the mic. Maybe it's time to actually get what they're really about. And we haven't done that. If you go back and look at it, we haven't, you know, we just get this very soft questions. It's like, oh, tell us about your plans. We want democracy for Sudan. How? You know, what is the 1, 2, 3? We never did that because we went with the flow. This whole, you know, this is the Sudan's crush, you know, it's like Sudan's hero, Sudan's upcoming president, prime minister, all of that. And it kind of affects you. You know, you don't want to be the one, you don't want to be the person, you know, who's like, oh, she went hard on him or he went hard on him, because then everybody's going to look at you and you're afraid of that anger that's going to come. And again, it shows that we're accountable to the public. And I think if anything, we need to make sure that we respect that by being hard on those who are giving us their statements and who are talking to us on the media, because they act like they're speaking on behalf of 45 million people. I think we should treat them like we are holding them accountable on behalf of those 45 million people.
Thank you, Hiba. Rania, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hello, Daria. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the informing session. And it is really thought-provoking. So I have a comment more than a question. It's about the point that Amjad mentioned earlier about staff deficiencies. And I want to take it to the point that we know that the army is not only operationally deficient, but also morally. So, and even if a ceasefire were negotiated, there is no guarantee of compliance, given the prevailing culture of impunity within the institution. And so, like, whatever option that we have for reform or merely removing top-ranking officials like Al-Burhan wouldn't address the underlying issues of impunity and unchecked power. So the risk of a coup d'etat by entrenched military leaders remains high, and the army has historically shown reluctance to challenge its own hierarchy or intervene on behalf of civilian authorities. And obviously the RSF is taking the lead on that now. So can you give us some insights? This question is for you, Dalia, and also for Amjad. How can we enforce reform within the national army, considering all the past resistance and the risk of armed opposition to change? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. Amjad?
Thank you. Let me put it very clear. It's not about the technical deficiency of the army, of SAF only. I'm saying it very clearly. SAF, it's not only deficient, it's politically corrupt. It's a product of a very corrupt 30 years of totalitarianism, and it has history of meddling with outside its role in Sudan. We are the country with the majority of with the biggest number of coup attempts all over Africa. We had 18 coup attempts since our independence in less than 60 years. So basically, I'm not defending SAP by any mean here or saying that they are the party that we should support. No, we should actually stand in this war against the two actors. However, SAF is still part of the state apparatus. It is still part of the law enforcing apparatus of the country. These laws are bad. It needs change. It needs reform. But that's what you do to the state apparatus. You reform the state apparatus. Our health system is one of the worst in Africa, but we cannot talk about okay, let's dismantle it and replace it with a private health system. We cannot do this to the finance ministry. We cannot do this to the state apparatus because it's ours. The militia is not ours. The militia is Hemeti's. So basically, this is my point. And if you remember, until the eruption of this war, I was and even before, even when I was in the government, I was alone, and I'm not saying this to say but I was publicly writing about إصلاح المؤسسة العسكرية حق وواجب وضرورة. I was taking this fight with the army in order to reform the army, even when we were in that partnership, which, by the way, Hiba, was an attempt. Nobody claimed that this is the best answer. This was the possible answer, and if we found out it was the wrong answer. Nobody is trying to avoid accountability here. So forcing them to reform is not an option. What they did led to this. They are accountable for this war. It's not, yes, this is the militia war, but they were part of enabling the militia to that extent. They were part of corrupting the transitional path to the way that it led to this. And let's not forget that the war did not start on the 15th of April. It started on the 25th of October 2021 when they throw the coup. That doesn't mean that Hamdok's government was the best government, but it was a civilian government. We had civilian tools to fight against it. Right now, the same way that we demand dismantling the militia by politics, we demand reforming the army by politics. Politics is not about, there is something that there is a very big misperception that politics is the art of possible. And politics, it's about compromise. No, what happened in front of the headquarters during the sitting, during Al-I'tisam, was politics. This was public politics. This was people politics. So basically, we had a history. We had the biggest number of the biggest share of coup attempts, but we also had the biggest share and the biggest number of revolutions, of popular revolution. We had 4 popular revolutions in these 60 years. No one else had this. We are a great nation. Wallahi al-Azim, I'm not saying it because I want to glorify us. But like this country had a great history and had a great history politically and culturally and all of that. Trying to summarize it to Himeti, like we had Gardoon School for Medicine like in the 20s of the last century. And we had University of Khartoum there for a very long time. We cannot be summarized to Himeti and Burhan. And we shouldn't accept that. That's one. There is another thing. There is another question about the support to the emergency room. I think from Ahmed. Ghani, or Ghani, I hope I answered your question. But I think that the civil tools, the civilian political tools are still valid and will always be valid. So we continue putting our pressure for it. Ahmed asked about the support to the grassroots initiative. That should be something that all politicians and all those who have an influential voice in the public sphere should continue to do. And I would be very specific on something that we at Fikra have been calling for since November last year, is to put pressure on the international community to recognize the emergency response room volunteers as humanitarian actors protected by the Geneva Convention, because they receive harassment and they receive attacks from both sides, from both SAF and RSF, like whenever they like. Recognizing them as humanitarian volunteers, and this is a very specific term in the international humanitarian law, it gives them the protection of the Geneva Convention 4 and 3. And the international community, of course, trying to play safe, and so they are avoiding this. Also, working with them, we all have relatives and acquaintances in Sudan, and many of them are engaged on this. It's not enough just to send them money. We need to be their voices. We need to be their tongues in the while we are in the safety. Other than Hiba, we all pray for your safety, of course, every day. But we outside Sudan in our safety, we need to be their mouths and their tongues, and we need to be the conduit that they can deliver the messages to them. I know a lot of Sudanese in diaspora are sending them money, but money is not enough. We need to put pressure on the international community as much as we can to provide them with the protection that they need to continue serving our people.
Thank you, Dr. Amjad. Ghani, I'll just respond quickly. I believe there has to be reform. I think the political dinosaurs and our military dinosaurs need to go. And the only way that can happen is by them allowing the younger, the youth generation, the younger generation to be a part, to have a seat at the table, which is why they're not giving them those seats, because they know if they give them these seats, they'll be pushed aside. But once that happens, and I think what's happening now with the emergency room responders, it's proof. They are the actual state. Right now, the ERRs and the volunteers and the civic actors are the state. They're holding up the country. They're allowing this country to remain as a state, as a nation. Otherwise, if left under the hands of both the army and the RSF, there will be no Sudan left. It will be like a has-been in the history books. And so there has to be reform. There has to be the younger, the newer voices need to be given the time and the place and the right to be in the middle of everything. And that goes for the army, for the lower ranks, that goes to the political parties, for the younger members, and that goes for the civic actors as well, to make room for the other voices, the younger voices who have actually, for the past 5 years, have been the most harmed by what's been happening in this country. You know, we went from a revolution to the COVID shutdown, to the coup, to the war. Their futures have been impacted. There's a significant brain drain that's happening in Sudan right now, and we need to stop the flow. And the only way that can be stopped is by giving them the opportunity, the chance for them to step in and do their job, but they're not being allowed to. And neither is the international community giving them that opportunity, even though we've been talking and calling for it for God knows how long. Iyad, do you have something to say? Do you want to add something or no?
So, based on Ahmed's question, I would say, unfortunately, nothing was done to involve these grassroots groups in any political dialogue, even during the two civilian government, which is a part of Sudanese political elite historical issues. Those same political elite once the two general seized power by a coup back in 2021. They asked those grassroots groups to save the revolution, even though they didn't consider them important during the transitional period.
Thank you, Iyad. Well, it's nearly, I've been talking for an hour and a half now, more. So I'd like to thank our guests, Hiba, Iyad, and Dr. Amjad. Thank you very, very much. I hope we leave this webinar with some ideas of what we can do and not be too despondent by what has been happening and is still happening in Sudan. And I hope all that we've talked about, people can go take what we've said, what's been discussed, and try to implement it, because end of the day, the change will come from us, the Sudanese, whether we're in Sudan or outside Sudan. We need to bang the drums louder. We need to keep on talking about Sudan because we are the privileged ones. We're safe. And that's our duty as Sudanese. We have to keep talking about those who cannot speak for themselves. And I hope next time we have a similar webinar, it will be in much better circumstances, and we'll all be smiling and saying that, khalas, the war is over, it's time to rebuild. So again, thank you, Iyad. Thank you, Hiba. Thank you,
Thank you for
Amjad.
having me.
Thank you, everyone who's joined us tonight. And hopefully we'll have another webinar soon. Same riveting conversation and same discussion about Sudan. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, Nali. Bye-bye.
Bye.